Okay, this is On Killing by Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman, who I'm sure if he Googles this, he will probably be horrified that his book is being reviewed alongside some of the other material on my channel, but who knows? Um, Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman wrote this book in 1995, I believe. Yes, copyright 1995. This was the 1996 edition. On Killing is exactly what the name implies. It's a breakdown of the psychology of killing in combat and um, what that takes to train someone to do that, and then what kind of psychological impact there is on someone who has been trained to do that and then does that in combat and then is released back into society, and the impacts of that and all the fallout of that and everything. It's not a doesn't really take any kind of judgmental angle on that. Of It's more just very bare bones. This is what's happening in someone's mind, and this is what it really doesn't get into the obviously the specific wars. This is about the broader subject of taking a young man and training them on how to engage human targets and then go to the battlefield and do that against a fellow human being, and just how that all works in someone's mind and the psychology of that. And lots of interesting context about Vietnam, about the proximity to the victim, about if somebody is, obviously hand-to-hand combat with a bayonet or something is going to have a drastically different effect on someone than, shooting at a 300-meter target or something. So a lot of information about that. And if you're really, this is one of those that I would only recommend if you're really if you really want to do a deep dive on just the psychology of how the military coordinates that training to bring someone to that point where they can loose someone on the battlefield with the understanding that they're most likely going to do what they've been trained to do. Because one of the things he covers in here is just how much that is against everyone's just general code of conduct in their own mind, that people do not want to kill. Like healthy, well-adjusted human beings do not want to kill each other. And to make them do that, or to get them to a point where they believe they are doing that for a just cause, takes a significant amount of training, which is kind of surprising. Some of this, when I read it, I was a little surprised, just because we live in an era where, of course, he wrote this in 95, so, almost, almost 30 years ago. I'm curious how much some of the video game culture and things like that, first-person shooter games, have really eroded away some of that, because one of the things he talks about is how in some theaters of combat there, where like if you were shooting someone who looked like you, guys would tend to aim high and try to not shoot. They didn't want to be the one. They thought maybe the other guy will shoot the guy. So there were in instances in like Japan where someone looked noticeably different. He found that it was much easier for people to shoot and kill people who looked obviously different than them. In instances where they looked similar or they looked the same, same racial, same cultural makeup, that was much harder for them to pull the trigger. So a lot of that kind of discussion in here, and that really got me thinking about a lot of what's happening in Ukraine, because you have the two cultures. You have not two cultures. You really have just one Slavic culture for the most part, doing battle with itself by way of these militias in Ukraine and the Russian military. And the interesting thing that I've noticed, and I don't recommend you do this unless you really are mentally and spiritually fortified to do so, but I had heard about the Azov battalion and things like that, but I didn't really understand how deep that rabbit hole went. So I had heard rumors about some of that. So I actually went the other day and I found I'd heard rumors of war crimes and things like that on both sides. So I went into Telegram and some of Twitter and found some of these Azov battalion guys, some of the fighters, some of the commanders in Azov, some of their social media pages. And if you want to be absolutely horrified about what human beings will do to each other, pull up some of that, because these guys are not hyperbole Nazis. These are literal Nazis in the literal definition of the word. And what they are doing to Russian soldiers that they've caught is barbaric in the extreme. We're talking ISIS level atrocities and then some. But here's why I wanted to get into that. I want to just do a quick departure here on the subject of this, but to really get into what makes that different from, obviously you've got combatants entering a battlefield and they're all going there to fulfill some kind of military objective, and that is probably going to require killing. So what makes that different? What makes what the Azov guys are doing so different in its very nature? When me, as someone who has undergone military training, and I see some of their stuff, and it makes me physically ill to see it. What is it that is so off about that? Setting aside the obvious adjectives like evil and things like that, it's very similar to the tactics of death squads that we saw going all the way back to really like the Irgun and the Stern Gang back in British Palestine. That idea of sheer terror, and this is, again, I know this is kind of convoluted, but I want to make this, I think this is an important point to make about this subject of why people kill and all this. Most professional soldiers enter a battlefield to get an objective done. They're not there to kill for sport. And the idea that someone would toy with them if they were captured and treat them like a frog that they caught in the creek and torture them to death is absolutely terrifying. Even the thought as a soldier of having your body toyed with is a terrifying thought. The idea that your corpse would be desecrated. I know to a lot of people are like, what does it matter? You're dead. But there's something about that unknown aspect of that. And that really goes back to a lot of the weird ritual abuse things that I've talked about in other videos. There's a totally different mindset at play in these death squads that enter the battlefield to do that kind of work, because this is way past the point of just achieving a military objective. These guys are there to create terror, and they are there to create a level of terror to demoralize the enemy on a spiritual level, to make them think about and to make it personal. Unlike people that say, oh no, it's not personal, we're just doing this military objective. This is just the opposite. This is very personal. One of the things these Azov guys had on their page that really blew me away, just how, there's no other word than evil for it, of getting the cell phone of someone they were either about to kill or had just killed, and obviously had gotten them to give them their password, and then called their parents to tell them what they had just done to their child. And there's several. You can look them up. I'm not going to put links or anything. I don't want to give that any more traffic than it already has. These guys are very proud of this, that they call up the relatives, the girlfriends, whoever, and tell them what they just did to these soldiers, and on FaceTime. So they're seeing it. They're seeing some of this stuff. One where they had a pilot they had caught that was still alive, and they had brought him from a crash site, and they were filming themselves. Somebody else was filming them on FaceTime with this guy's girlfriend, and he was conscious and lucid and saying what all they were going to do with him, and it was very barbaric, of a sexual nature, and I'll leave it at that. But that, to me, is where things really get weird, is the difference between this standard killing to accomplish a military objective, which is still dirty business, no doubt about it. but the whole element of death squads, anyone participating in that has to have a totally different spiritual composition to carry that out. And that, again, goes back to some of my reviews of literature dealing with like the Franklin scandal and Children for the Devil and some of that kind of material, where it's obvious these people have a totally different ideology. And that's what it takes to form these death squads. And I hope to get into this in another video even deeper, and I'll see if I can set up my computer to where I can show some of the stuff I can look up, if provided I can look up some of this stuff safely without uncorking all hell on my computer. But I think that's an important distinction between what this guy is talking about in his book and the level of barbaric, like death squad killing, like School of the Americas killing that you had death squads trained to do down in Georgia at Fort Benning, I believe it was, back in the 80s. That's the disturbing thing about what the Azov battalion guys are doing, is it smacks of that type of death squad training. And the interesting thing about this is kind of like killing light compared to that. And it really does make you wonder how that training is accomplished. Some of these guys, it's obvious from some of their videos and some of the stuff they put out that they are following certain guidelines to do these things. And that is really troubling. And I think that ultimately that's what really made me think of this book, is watching some of this stuff unfold now. It really makes you aware, if you're aware of all these other things about ritual abuse and things like that, you start to see where these ideologies come together on the battlefield, and you start to see that there's a very dark side of humanity that pops its head up in the wide open whenever there is a war, and things that are normally pushed to the dark alleys of cities where we don't really have to think about it pop up in full view of humanity anytime there is full-scale war. So anyway, if you have thoughts on that, I'd love to hear them, and I know that's a major departure from the topic, but this obviously does not get into training death squads, but I think that's a fascinating thing to think about in regards to what's happening right now, because in the mainstream press, you don't hear anything about that. But I tell you, if you find these guys' social media page, you will be shocked to the extreme. And that's the point. That's how those guys operate. So anyway, On Killing by Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman from 1995. And I'll stop now.